Dr. Shelley Rigger is well known to everyone here, I think. It's safe to say that among the American scholars who specialize on China and Taiwan, she is the one who best understands Taiwan domestic politics. And that's saying a lot because this is not a subject that's easy to understand. Shelley is the Brown Professor of East Asian Politics and chair of the Political Science Department at Davidson College. And that is one of America's leading small liberal arts institutions, and their basketball team isn't bad either. Shelley arrived at Davidson, which is it's near Raleigh, in 1993, even before she received her PhD from Harvard University. I know from personal knowledge how devoted she is to her students and how much she regards teaching as a mission and a vocation. And so we were very fortunate that she was able to take time away from that mission to be with us today. We've learned in good ways and bad ways, I didn't put that right. We've learned in a lot of different ways over the last 20 years that the key driver of cross-strait relations and U.S.-Taiwan relations really is Taiwan domestic politics, including elections. And in Shelley's scholarly work, she has, as I suggested, made a major contribution to how we understand that driver. I recall in the late 1990s when those of us who worked on Taiwan in the U.S. government were becoming increasingly cognizant of the fact that Taiwan politics was changing. It was changing in ways that we did not understand, and we realized at one point that the DPP, which we really didn't understand, might come to power. And it was just at that point that Shelley began to contribute to our understanding of the DPP, which she did very well. She was the right person on the right issue at the right time. She brings to her work on Taiwan an analytic precision and enthusiasm that makes her work really interesting. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was late August. MSNBC had a segment on strange legislatures, and Taiwan was one of the ones that was being featured, and Shelley was the key informant, and you could really feel the enthusiasm with which she viewed the Li Fayuan. And it was also clear she didn't take the whole thing too seriously and had a real sense of humor, which for Taiwan politics you have to have. At the core of all her work, I believe, is, and this I'm serious about, is an empathy for the people of Taiwan and a hope that Taiwan's democratic system will serve Taiwan's people well. She understands very well why Taiwan matters for its own sake, for the development of democracy in general, and for peace and progress in East Asia. In fact, she's written a book with that title, Why Taiwan Matters, and it's the book that I recommend to anybody who says, tell me one book I should read about Taiwan so that I understand everything, and that's the one I recommend. So we're very fortunate to have Shelley with us today. Please join me in welcoming her to our conference.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. Obviously, there's nothing like a book plug like that to make your day. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to listen to this absolutely fantastic lineup of speakers already in the morning, and I'm really looking forward to the afternoon. I've taken already 11 pages of notes, so that's pretty good. Earlier today, my brother-in-law said to me, you know, I'm not really much of a glass half full kind of guy. In fact, I'm usually pretty suspicious about what's in the glass. But those of you who know me know that I am a glass half full kind of person. I generally have a very optimistic, if there's a way you can take an optimistic view, I find it. So it may come as a surprise that this is kind of a half-empty kind of a talk today, and I don't really mean it. I guess I need to start by saying I'm not sure I really mean what I'm going to say, but I want to ask the question, especially to this room full of people with great expertise in Taiwan politics, U.S.-Taiwan relations, U.S.-Taiwan PRC relations. For a long time, the mainstream analysis of cross-strait relations has been that the status quo is pretty stable. It can be sustained for a long time, that there's no immediate reason for anybody to be panicking, but that there are circumstances under which this equilibrium could be disrupted. And I guess the question that I want to ask today is, am I crazy, or do we see those circumstances beginning to come together now in a way that we may actually have to start thinking about the possibility of a disruption of this stable equilibrium in the Taiwan Strait? So I have three things I want to do very quickly today. One is to spell out those circumstances under which the status quo could be threatened. The second is to point out some evidence that those circumstances may be beginning to manifest themselves. And then third, to mention, of course, and this is where I refill the glass at least halfway up so that I can still be my optimistic self, I want to talk about some of the forces and factors that mitigate against a crisis, even in the face of some forces and factors that may be moving us in that direction. So most observers over the past few years have agreed that there's no immediate threat to the status quo. And what I mean by the status quo is Taiwan's de facto independence. There's little urgency for de jure independence in Taiwan, and there's little urgency for de jure unification in the PRC. So we take from that the idea that we can keep on kicking the can a while longer. Why is there so little urgency for change on either side? Well, Taiwan is kept in check by an awareness of the dangers of defying or challenging the PRC, as well as by the economic value, in fact, the necessity, the economic necessity of peaceful and cooperative cross-strait relations. And honestly, and here I may disagree a little bit with some of what we heard this morning, I think Taiwan is kept in check by the fact that most Taiwanese people see very little practical value in seeking to change the status quo toward legal independence. So Taiwan's policy has been to cultivate good relations with the PRC, but avoid being drawn into political talks that could erode the island's freedom of action. So that's what's keeping Taiwan in check. What's keeping the PRC in check are at least three things, and I'm sure many of you could think of many more. First, the PRC recognizes that acting to change the status quo, even in a non-coercive way, would definitely be difficult, definitely be costly, and definitely be risky. So it's safer and easier to kick the can. Second, Beijing believes that time is on its side. Its relative power is growing, as is Taiwan's economic dependence on the PRC. And then third, China's internal challenges are very significant, and we've heard a little bit about that already today, but they're manageable as long as the leadership keeps giving them sufficient attention. So having serious but manageable internal problems keeps Beijing preoccupied and risk-averse. So the PRC's policy is to insist very strongly that Taiwan make no moves toward legal independence, but to remain pretty tolerant in practice of the status quo as long as Taiwan is not lunging toward a change in the status quo. At the same time, the PRC is working to promote this economic entanglement between the two sides and occasionally to leverage that for political gain. In short, both sides have good reasons not to push too hard for a change to the status quo, so the situation is stable. But there are at least two developments that we routinely mention in conversations about what could upset this equilibrium, what could change this well-established pattern that supports the warm peace or the lukewarm peace at worst. And one is that the PRC's calculus could change so that it begins to believe time is not on its side. That if the PRC really begins to sense that waiting puts it in a weaker position than not waiting, than acting more quickly, then a change in strategy could result. And then the second thing we often talk about as a possible precipitator of a pronounced change in PRC policy is that the PRC could develop internal or external problems so severe that the leadership sees the need for some kind of diversion or demonstration of its nationalist commitments to distract the PRC public and refocus Chinese people's attention on the CCP as the defender of Chinese nationalism. And the question that I have for you is, are we seeing these developments today? Is there evidence that time is no longer on Beijing's side and that the constellation of problems troubling the PRC is ripening toward a place where Beijing may see the need for some kind of change in its Taiwan policy? Mostly I want to talk about the evidence that time is not on, or may not any longer be on Beijing's side. But I will say a little bit about the PRC, even though I don't actually have those qualifications. But the evidence that time is not on Beijing's side is a Taiwan story, so I do have those qualifications. Or anyway, Richard believes I do. So what's the evidence that time may not be on Beijing's side or that Beijing may begin to perceive that to be the case? The argument for the PRC to remain patient is that the mainland is becoming increasingly powerful economically, politically, and militarily, especially relative to Taiwan. So if present trends continue, it becomes increasingly, not decreasingly, difficult to imagine how Taiwan could resist in the long term the PRC's determination to achieve some kind of outcome favorable to its preferences, which is like a really long-winded way of saying something like unification. And I'm going to skip over a description of those favorable trends, but just to say that while the PRC's political, economic, and military might all are increasing, they are increasing at different speeds, and it's not really clear how we would know when the mainland's power had reached the point where the tide had decisively turned in its favor, so that for the Chinese leadership, trying to know when to change policy toward Taiwan is more art than science. So the biggest problem that they face in trying to understand when the trends, whether the trends are favorable or unfavorable, and whether it's safe to continue waiting for these military, economic, and political forces to ripen up into a moment where the PRC can act on its preferences, the biggest challenge to making that call is Taiwanese public opinion. Because if what you're trying to do is engineer peaceful unification, and I think that is ultimately in the long run what the PRC would like to do, engineer peaceful unification, you have to be able to sell peaceful unification. You have to be able to sell unification in Taiwan. If it's going to be peaceful, you have to be able to make the case for it in Taiwan. And I think it just looks like that's getting harder and harder and harder, not easier, easier, easier. Hong Xiu-zhu's positions notwithstanding, unification has no support at all in Taiwan right now. And the other indicators that the PRC looks at for measures of how it's doing in terms of the sales job also all look very negative. One of those indicators is support for independence versus unification. And on the independence unification debate in Taiwan, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that while support for unification is off the charts, that is off the bottom of the charts, support for independence is also low and consistently low. We don't see a trend of rising support for independence. It's been in the 20% range for 20 years, and it just kind of stagnates there. But the bad news is, if you dig a little deeper, support for independence starts to look less weak, and support for unification starts to look even weaker than the surface level trends would suggest. So for example, the Taiwan National Security Survey, which I guess they did it again in 2014, but I don't think they've released the data yet. So I'm looking at 2011 data, asking people, if you could have independence and there would be no war, right? If you could have independence and it would cost Taiwan nothing, would you support independence? And around 80% of people say, yes, absolutely. If we could have independence for free, we would take it. But if it does have a military cost, which I think we all agree it would right now, the support for independence drops to somewhere around 30 to 35%. Meanwhile, if you could have unification and it would cost you nothing because the conditions, the economic, political, and social conditions in the mainland would have converged with Taiwan, only like a quarter to a third, so somewhere in the high 20s to low 30s, percentage-wise, would favor unification under the best possible scenario. And at least half of Taiwanese oppose unification under any circumstances. So even best case scenario, we don't want it. Another piece of negative evidence from the PRC's point of view is that the trend in support for unification under ideal circumstances is particularly negative. Until 2005, more than half of Taiwanese said, we could accept unification if it meant that stuff wouldn't change. Now we're down to below 30%, and opposition, active opposition to unification under the best possible scenario was up to around 60%. So basically, support for unification under any circumstances has reached a low point, while support for independence under the best case scenario is extremely high. So that's not a good trend for the PRC. On the economic front, the strategy of waiting for economic integration to create support for political integration, I would argue, is also losing momentum. Even 4 years ago, during the 2012 presidential election, the candidates needed to persuade voters that they could keep the economic ties, not only continuing at sort of the same pace, but accelerating in order to make a persuasive case. And I think a big part of the reason that Chen-yuan was not elected in 2012 was she didn't make the case to the voters that she could keep the economic momentum rolling past 2012. This time around, after 4 years of disappointing economic performance and rising skepticism about the distributional implications of cross-strait economic engagement, voters' requirements have changed. They may not have reversed completely, but they may actually have reversed completely to the point where in this election, you don't have to be able to persuade anybody that you can make more economic integration happen. What you need to persuade people is that you can protect Taiwan against the risks associated with the ever-accelerating dependence of Taiwan on the PRC economy. And in fact, many voters, maybe not a majority, but a significant chunk of voters, I would argue, are looking for a candidate who will talk about how to reduce Taiwan's dependence on the mainland, not deepen the interaction. Another big problem for China is the KMT's shocking weakness at this moment, both in terms of party identification, which is below party identification with the DPP for the first time since the early 2000s, and in terms of the party's internal politics. And I just have to guess that at the Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing, they sit around and they ask each other, how in the world did this happen? So one final indicator to look at is Taiwan people's self-identification as Taiwanese, Chinese, or both, and here the trend is clearly very negative for Beijing as well. Since 2007, the percentage claiming Taiwanese identity has increased from the low 40% to around 60%, and that is a huge trend. It may be leveling off, but it's still extreme, it's just a very sharp increase in a very short time. The presidential and legislative elections will be an imperfect manifestation of how these trends translate into politics, but as imperfect as they are, they're still what we have to go on, so the PRC will be looking at them very closely. So that's the evidence that time may not any longer be on Beijing's side, and that Beijing may have to change that calculus to think about how do we respond now to a negative trend rather than try to shape a positive trend. On the second point, there are many people in this room who understand China's problems much better than I do, but I would just say it seems clear that the PRC is facing economic and political headwinds that could eventually sharpen into a situation where there is need for Xi Jinping to do something to consolidate his support and to show his people that even if he can't control the economy, even if he can't control the PRC's image in the region and lots of other, even if he can't control corruption in the Communist Party, he can control something. And if that something that he can control turns out to be Taiwan, where, that's not good. So here the perpetual optimist is delivering some more sobering news, but I think there are still a number of forces that are actually pulling in a more positive direction and are acting as a kind of traction on the status quo. One, the DPP is probably going to win the election, at least the presidential, and make major inroads in the legislative, but it is a less odious DPP in 2016 from the PRC's point of view than it was in 2012. And if they allow themselves to take this in and to hear the message that Taiwan is sending, I think they can be less nervous about the implications of a DPP victory. Tsai Ing-wen is not Chen Shui-bian. And she's definitely not worse than Chen Shui-bian from the PRC's point of view. And telling themselves that she is really doesn't serve the PRC's interest, because it's not accurate, among other things. And there are ways to spin this election result that will make it seem like less of a disaster for China. They can point to the chaos in the KMT and say, you know, people didn't vote for the DPP, they voted against the chaos in the KMT. Song Choo-yu's doing Xi Jinping a favor by getting in and splitting the KMT vote, or the blue vote, so that it looks less like a big surge of support for the DPP and more like you know, a repeat of 2000. You know, I don't necessarily agree with this. I'm just giving the PRC some talking points to talk themselves out of needing to overreact to this election result. Second, I think China's problems are actually still manageable with focused attention, and as long as they don't get distracted by side issues like Taiwan, you know, they'll be fine. Third, the military risk is still very high, and so adventurism is still risky, and therefore the deterrence of more precipitous action or a powerful change in the PRC's policy, I think the deterrents to that are still very noticeable and powerful. Fourth, China can't afford to worsen relations with its neighbors, so it has to pay attention to Taiwan in the context of a deteriorating regional scene. And finally, and here I am on shaky ground as a Taiwan specialist commenting on CCP internal politics, but it seems to me that strong action or risk-taking could activate or intensify rather than alleviate splits in the PRC leadership. And that knowledge of that possibility may be a deterrent as well to taking stronger action on the Taiwan issue. Xi Jinping would need to build a consensus for action on that front, and given the risks involved, that could be very difficult. And here I'll just end by giving you two possibilities, one from Tung this morning and one from Szu-yin this morning. Tung says, a Taiwan-related crisis would reflect poorly on Xi Jinping and his predecessors, so is unlikely. Szu-yin says Xi Jinping would actually be more damaged if he were seen to be looking the other way and tolerating Taiwan going in a bad direction. Honestly, both of those logics make sense to me, so I would be interested to hear which you think is more persuasive, and also whether you have other things that I can add to my glass of positive trends to help me, you know, have a glass that's even more than half full, so that I don't have to worry about the glass being like more than half empty. Thank you.
So my answer to your two choices is only she knows for sure. We have 10 minutes until we have to break. Shelley's going to take her own questions. You want to do it here or? Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yes.
My name is Hiro Matsumura, St. Andrews University, Osaka, Japan. Although the Kuomintang is in disarray and weakened, the party has a privileged position in societal, political, economic life there. The party has a huge, its own asset, maybe reaching to the $100 billion, which originate, major portion of which originate from compulsory expropriation of imperial Japanese asset. Based on this wealth and asset, it controls social keystones and a cornerstone, and control the media, right? So do you think DPP's approach focusing on grassroots movement and SNS is a sort of the inevitable choice? And how do you see the competition between the KMT's privileged position and DPP's new approach, particularly after Ms. Tsai is elected? Maybe Kuomintang cannot change the public opinion, but it can, based on this wealth and the privileged position, can obstruct DPP policies and encroach public support for Tsai.
Well, what we see with the KMT maybe is that money isn't everything, you know? You can have a lot of money, you can have a lot of positions in government, you can have a lot of resources, and you can still blow it completely. So, but I have to be careful because I was one of the people back in 2000 and 2001 who predicted the demise of the KMT. Probably at one of your events, I used a very ungenerous analogy, which I will not repeat here. But so, you know, I think it's right that the KMT will pull itself back together. But I also think that Taiwan politics has fundamentally changed. And something that was discussed in the previous panel is the blue-green divide disappearing. Yes and no. I mean, I think the blue-green divide, those two vessels will remain because I think they are meaningful in the context of Taiwan's electorate, but I don't necessarily think that the content is unchanging. I think this election is much more about economic issues than past elections have been. And it is absolutely true that that Taiwan's conversation about economics invariably invokes cross-strait relations. But if you think about Zhu Yunhan's last slide, almost everything on that slide, except for the part about cross-strait, you know, like the external problems that Taiwan has, but the political problems and the economic problems that Taiwan has that Yunhan identified, the USA has exactly that same litany of problems. The economic problem that Taiwan is facing is not only a cross-strait problem, it's a globalization problem. And the distributional problems that Taiwan is facing are not about cross-strait relations. They're about globalization, and they're about technology, and they're about why my students in the United States are just as desperate thinking about their future prospects as my colleagues from Taiwan's students are thinking about their futures. So I think what the blue-green baskets need to do is they sort of need to go aqua and teal in order to accommodate a broader range of issues, but within that basic context, I think the new issues can be encompassed. So I think that the KMT will be back in some form, but I think organizationally, they have got to process this trauma fully in order to, you know, come surging back the way they did after 2001. Anybody else? Yes.
Thank you. Eric Gomez from the Cato Institute. I was wondering if you could comment, I know the election's more about economic issues, but is there any significant split within the parties over how they think Taiwan should be handling defense-related things, if indeed the glass is half empty or less than half empty? And also, do you perceive any difference in political willpower for self-defense from the KMT or the DPP? Is one more committed or less committed?
So both parties' leaders have consistently promised, right, to increase Taiwan's defense spending to 3% of GDP and to be more active in self-defense. And I think there's, you know, this is the sort of thing that we could talk about for the rest of the afternoon. There is more going on than probably most of us are aware of. But I will say that the track record of the KMT in the last 8 years has been disappointing to many in the U.S. in terms of not making it to that 3% and not really giving good answers to the question, why not and when will you turn things around? So I think the DPP is trying to use that as, and not just trying to use that politically. I don't mean that, I don't think it's cynical. I think the DPP is actually committed to doing better on the defense front. And something that I learned today that I have to think about a lot, because I had not really thought about the 92 consensus as a larger package, as an edifice of ideas and practices, as Szu-yin put it. But, I think if the Ma administration has the goal of assembling a kind of coherent set of strategies that support a particular vision and version of cross-strait relations, then we have to think about defense policies maybe in that package. The fact that the DPP is not interested in building that same edifice might give the DPP more flexibility to be a little bit more active on the defense front. Alan.
Thanks, Alan Romberg, Stimson. It may be a question that ought to go also to the previous panelists, but you talk about the election being primarily about economic issues, and we saw data which showed that confidence that Tsai can manage the economy or social issues better than either of her opponents is pretty obvious. But my question is there evidence as to whether that reflects great confidence in her or a lack of confidence in the others compared to her?
Well, one of the things that I really loved on that slide was that Song Chu-yu is like way towering over the other two in terms of performance and experience. And so even though people don't like him on the other measures, they recognize that he has this experience. And what that tells me is that's a real poll that people are answering seriously. Like they're thinking about, they can disaggregate these people into their components. So one of their components is performance and experience. Another component is policy preferences, what they stand for, what they're likely to do. And another component is kind of personality and capacity to govern and to function well in interactions with others. And I think, Song does great he has a lot of experience. And I think it's worth mentioning that Song is, I think this one is going to be more like 2000 than 2012 because Song is campaigning at the grassroots. He's drawing back into those networks that he cultivated when he was the Taiwan provincial governor, and he's being a retail politician again. So he's, people can recognize that about him, but I think they also recognize that his capacity to interact successfully with other political leaders is limited, and his policy agenda is not well understood. Hong Xiu-ju does poorly across the board. She has no experience, people don't like her, and she stands for the wrong things. Tsai Ing-wen has moderate experience. She's mostly standing for the right things, mostly. I mean, she's been really careful in how she talks. And she is perceived as being able to get along with people and do things better than the other two. So I think it is in that sense sort of, she averages well. The other, Song has peaks and valleys. Hong has mostly valleys. So I think it's in that sense that Tsai really dominates. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but it was something I wanted to say. It looks like we're out of time.
Yes, my obligation to the organizers was to get us off the stage at 1:30, and I'm going to fulfill that obligation. But this will put a big demand on you because whatever you have to do in the break, you have 5 minutes to do it, and then be back here. But before you leave, please join me in thanking Shelley for a great keynote address.